Welcome to Transformation and Digital Transformation. In every session, I bring to you some insights on digital transformation and strategy in today's economic climate. In today's session, we will be discussing about digital data and technology with my guest, Eddie Short. Eddie is a board director, CEO advisor of Mid Europa. He's a business transformation leader, and in past, he has worked as partner for Big Four, Capgemini, and many other companies. So, without further ado, welcome, Eddie. Welcome to my podcast
Pleased to
show.
be here. Pleased to be here, Lippy. Looking forward to the session, and thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. So, do you want to introduce yourself? Tell us a bit about yourself. Who is Eddie? What did you do? And where are you in these days of economic climate?
Yeah, no. So I'm so quite long in the tooth, as they say. I realised I first graduated in 1989, which is now over 33 years ago. I've had a career in, I would say, I started off as an engineer, but ended up in IT, and then gradually focused on the I rather than the T. I think my current career really kicked off in about 2003 when Capgemini asked me to do a strategy for data because they didn't know what they were doing. And having created a strategy for it, they said, well, we don't have anybody to run this. Would you be interested in running and seeing what you can do with it? And I started off with 6 people who did data migration. And over the period of time, I worked backwards from people who worked at the end of, you'd say, migrations all the way to the beginning in terms of initially, I would say, the technology of data and the technology of digital. And I became UK global leader for that of what's now called data and analytics at Capgemini. And then I was largely fascinated by the fact that we were working still with technologists in IT, and I really wanted to get to the full value of data. And I was approached by British American Tobacco, and I became what would now be called Chief Data Officer for them, and actually did a 3-year global transformation, basically helping them to become a truly multinational business, a truly global business from what had been basically a globally coordinated classic multinational with lots of individual P&Ls, and we basically joined up marketing, supply chain operations, and that was kind of the template for what I've done ever since. Having done that 3-year transformation, it's what do you do next? And I ended up back in consulting as a partner at KPMG. 4 years with them, including global transformations for banks, but also helped to set up an incubator that we called KPMG Capital to invest in data and digital and fintech companies. Having done that, I was one of 3 chief data officers for Aon, actually working with people. So actually the people and benefits business, healthcare, which is really insightful, is how do you use data to help drive people, which has kind of been really probably at the heart of my philosophy ever since. Really, it's kind of people drive businesses and data helps to drive and inform people.
Absolutely. What a fascinating journey, Eddie.
Yeah.
And these days we talk about chief digital officer, chief data officer, and you have started the journey a long time back. And obviously, data migration. Those days, we were talking about data migration. Obviously, there was no concept of chief data officer at that point in time. So, what do you think about? Is this going to be chief data officer? Is that going to be stay with us for a while, or
Well,
where is it going with
for me,
AI?
yeah, for me, I think so. I mean, I think banks and the Americans and the banks describe the chief data officer classically as the person who did data. And for me, it was always rather than just data, it was data and analytics, which I consider to be like yin and yang. It's like the analytics is data is basically great. It actually provides the fuel for a lot of businesses, but it's actually the insights you get out of it which actually drive people to make better and organizations to make better decisions. So data and analytics for me, and from what is AI, but basically a set of analytics which are then codified to basically evolve through more data, which becomes machine learning and advanced algorithms. So I think for me it's definitely a key role, and actually it's probably a pivoting. I think if you look at lots of organizations, and you'll know this as a digital advisor, for me, a lot of big corporates, I call it lipstick on a pig, digital initiatives where they've done a nice app, they've done a glossy front end, but because the back end is just no good, it just ends up being a very poor experience. And usually that's because it's got poor data to actually understand and support the customer. And technology is becoming more like infrastructure. It's still the singular source of competitive advantage for a lot of organizations and how we grow economies, but actually it's really what you do with it. And for me, data is what you do with it. So I describe, and what I'm doing now is Mid Europa, I am the digital tech and data advisor. And I describe data as being the one ring to rule them all in terms of, and so um, I think that for me is kind of the evolution. And really, they all fit together as about what I would call in a bank chief operations role, because everything that really supports and drives the business. Other organizations don't quite have the same kind of role, but I think that will be the evolution, because data is the source of competitive advantage. And if you look at particularly what we think of as the big tech companies or even the big digital companies, the likes of Amazon, Google, Facebook, Netflix, etc., the reality is their first, second, and third source of competitive advantage is data, data, and data. And so, unless you're
Absolutely.
really on top of data, and you're in a consumer business or increasingly in a business to business business, you're going to be rolled over when those companies come to play in your segment of the market.
Absolutely. And it's also about culture because when we talk about data, it's a competitive advantage. And using that data, making that decision within the organization, within company, it's also about defining that culture to use that data and make decisions. So, what do you think about how you're bringing that culture to making that decisions, the data driven decisions?
I think the culture is really, really important, and I think it's kind of, for me, it's about people. So people are what drives the culture of a business, an organization. I think, as they say, culture eats strategy, and culture is kind of defined almost by the leadership of the organization. It's difficult to then change a culture though if it's gone wrong. But actually, I'd say people and data again, kind of this yin and yang. It's actually how you make people more effective, and I actually look at. If you look at what we've done in organizations over the last 30 years, and I've been around a long time ago, when I was a mere boy, management 101 was make sure your people are what's working on either what's urgent or important. With
True.
all the tools that we provided people, whether it's Slack, whether it's basically Teams, or
Mhm.
it's Google, Gmail, WhatsApp, blah, blah, I often find that a lot of what I used to call white collar people are actually not, they're managing the top of their very many
Yeah.
inboxes. They're
Mhm.
not necessarily working on what's urgent or important. It's just trying to cope with what's coming at them. So a lot of what we have to do is simplify that. And again, data and AI is one way to actually streamline that, to actually give people the opportunity to be what I think human beings are good at. And you look at even with the evolution of things like the so-called large language models and
Yeah.
ChatGPT and similar things, human creativity is still the thing that's going to be valuable for human beings in this world, because and so that's what I try to basically really free the human from the machine, but also basically support them and enable them.
That is a very interesting point you have touched upon, and with that, a common fad. And sometime back, I think there was a big debate about the AI, machine learning are going to take the jobs of human. So, and as you have rightly said, it's about freeing up the human. But is it? What is your view on this kind of notion or the fad about the humans, the jobs will be taken over by AI or machine learning?
So that is a key focus for me right now, and I think the reality is a lot of what you're hearing now is these technologies, and Microsoft in some of the vanguard of this, launching with 365. They're going to launch 365 Copilot, and they've
Yeah.
piloted it with GitHub, and they're going to. And actually, I look at that, and actually, you think about the Copilot thing. It is actually going to fundamentally transform quite a lot of professional services industries. The likes of me, I think, will still be there. We've got plenty of work up until our retirement, either training these models or quality assuring the output. I think the big challenge, though, is for a lot of younger people. It's like, where do you gain experience? And that could include things like the law, accounting. I think a lot of technology, architecture, and digital, and even coding. When basically GPT can now throw out code, which is as good as kind of your median developer. Well, do you need junior developers? But you need them to get to senior. So on one side, I think a lot of jobs are going to disappear, and they're going to disappear pretty quickly, because
Mhm.
this next industrial revolution, which I think is the AI revolution, is going to happen in 10 to 15 years, not like the 150 of the first one. There will be a lot of new jobs created,
Yeah.
though, because people want caring, they want creativity, and yeah. So for me, maybe a controversial example, but I think the if you look at, say, the UK, I think the general practitioner role may well disappear in 10 years' time, because you can't see one now anyway.
Yeah.
And actually, if you do, you probably get to see a nurse practitioner. And if you
Mhm.
do see a GP, often they're actually looking up from their AI model. And what people want is somebody who cares. And actually, we all look up our own symptoms on Google and everything online already.
And finally, we can
But
have access to our own data about our
exactly. But you
own
will
personal
want specialist
information.
doctors who can. You will want specialist doctors and specialist people who can win. But you also, what you really value is highly skilled nurses who can also use those skills. So I think there'll be more nursing roles, maybe
Yeah.
less generic doctor roles. And so, as I say, a lot of careers and a lot of professions will be significantly
Mhm.
changed, and that dislocation will be a challenge because, yeah, I would say a lot of new jobs will be created, but will they be created fast enough to replace the
Exactly.
jobs that have been eliminated? Probably not. And so that's going to be, I'd say that, yeah, so the period 2025, 2035 is going to be, I
Mhm.
would say, quite a challenging one for governments and others, because a lot of people, I suspect, are going to be made redundant. But then, and yeah, new interesting careers and new industries will emerge. But obviously, that takes time.
It's going to be very fascinating to see what comes up, really, because there will be lots of jobs, new jobs will be created, and new areas jobs will be created. So yes, people will be freed up, and at the same time, they will be creating more creativity work rather than the repetitive work could be taken up by AI and the machine learning, because it can see all this information and you can create some, with technology you can create a lot of workflow that can take care of the repetitive tasks. With that, I would like to know, because I know you personally as a researcher, you're doing your research from Aston University. So are you talking about it? We have been talking about data and technology, and it's a big thing going on about DDAT as a terminology. So data, digital data and technology coming together, whether it's in private sector or public sector. A lot of work has been happening in the public sector as well. And the same goes for private sector business transformation going on from end to end. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your research? I know a lot of it, it's more you are still on the go. So tell us about whatever you can share about your research.
Yeah, sure. I'd love to share it because I think what I'm researching on is how how do you deliver sustainable and sustained competitive performance enabled through data and analytics, and I would include artificial intelligence. And that would seem obvious given the conversation we've been talking about. And there are many, I would say, American professors that are writing journals like Forbes and HBR and Sloan MIT, including people like Thomas Davenport and Eric Bin Johnson, um, telling you about the benefits of this thing. But actually, those guys have written precisely zero academically peer-reviewed papers on the topic in the 10, 15 years since big data first emerged as a big topic and actually was promoted actually by McKinsey probably about 2011, 2012. So there's a lot of kind of, you'd say, anecdotal and case study evidence, but not actually the underlying evidence. Now, there have been some researchers working on this topic, starting with a couple of people called Gupta and George, but probably the leading researcher is a European professor, is a Greek professor who works out of Norway, a guy called Patrick Mikolaev. And he's done quite a lot of research and a number of papers. And what a lot of the researchers that he's building on have basically worked on connecting resource theory um, to how you can use data and analytics to drive competitive advantage. And they probably extended that and saying, well, resource theory on its own, which was developed by a lot of professors, but effectively the person who codified it the most was a gentleman called Professor Jay Barney. He basically wrote the seminal paper in 1991. It was updated in 2001 and then 2011. And then there's another set of research by a guy called David Treese on dynamic capabilities, because they're basically saying one theory on its own is not quite capturing everything, so they're trying to combine two theories together. But resource theory is probably the little known alter ego of what is very known by many people as Porter's Five Forces. So
Mhm.
Porter's Five Forces talks about the competitive environment, but it's very much focused on the external, customers, your suppliers, and what's changing the market. Resource theory is basically how can you basically build um, unique capabilities within your organization, and they are tangible, intangible, and so-called human resources.
Mhm.
And it defines what you need to do. You need to have things that are valuable, rare, immutable, and organizationally unique to be differentiated. So one of the things for me working in tech and digital is that when you look at things that are immutable and effectively rare, that basically means that anything that is, unless you're a pure technology company,
Mhm.
technology of its own sense is basically not a source of competitive advantage for you.
Yeah,
And when I would look at it, so yeah, the reality is, yeah, there are many cloud platforms, but there are three big ones that anybody can pick: Azure from Microsoft, AWS from Amazon,
hmm
Google Cloud. So the reality is, you need one of them, right? And there are many visualization tools, there are many data science tools, there are many data ware. So the reality is, you need them, but it's in logical terms, it's what you do with it, which is
exactly.
a unique thing. It's kind of, and so that for me is where I'm focusing. It's kind of, and one of the things I've defined is what I call the ultimate thing, is what I've called an intelligent business. So this is a business that can dynamically reconfigure itself. I'm used to saying in response to events and the market, but now we're using data to predict and respond to
Okay.
basically customer needs and market changes. So this business then, and that's where we bring in the resources, but also the dynamic, so-called dynamic capabilities, because it's actually how you can change your business, which is really important. And when you bring all those things together, you look and think, well, actually, um, when we've talked, and we have done this for many years because I've been around a long time, we used to define operating models around people, process, and technology, which
Yeah,
largely meant process and technology, with people being the business case, i.e., how many people can we take out?
exactly.
And what a lot of organizations did was effectively automate their existing processes, because that was the best way to define them. And
hmm
sometimes maybe refine them a bit, but effectively they locked their current and legacy ways of working into ERP and CRM and supply chain management systems. And actually, if you look at those platforms, politely, SAP, Oracle, Salesforce, most organizations probably use 20%.
Yeah.
So my new world order, this intelligent business, is one that's really defined by your data in the cloud. A lot of your logic is then analytics and so-called machine learning algorithms connected by APIs to
hmm
increasingly less and smaller systems, which in the vernacular are known as microservices. And therefore, you can basically plug and play your microservices. And that's the kind of end state vision. It takes you, clearly going to take you a while to get there. But it does mean basically turn things on its head from traditionally where data was, quotes, the exhaust of processes and technology, to data is actually the input as well as the output. And for me, that takes IT full circle, because when I first learned about computing back in the 1980s, it was all about, it was called 101 was
Things
input,
have changed
process,
quite a lot
output.
with the age, with the digital age, and it
Things
has
have changed, but actually it's
transformed.
like input, process, output. Well, actually
Yeah,
data is input and output, and it's kind of a feedback loop. So it's
yeah,
just basically for me going full circle. So what you've got to do, all those things together, is then how can you create these kind of human, intangible, and tangible capabilities that we're going to give you something that's truly valuable, rare, and difficult to copy in your
yeah.
business. And so that's the heart of my research. And what makes it particularly novel is that although a number of researchers have started to look at this and combine resource theory and dynamic capabilities, no one has actually looked at the role of the leader of that function, which is known as
Mhm.
the chief data or chief data and analytics officer. So my completely novel part of my research is really, what is that role? How does that role evolve? And when you look at it using resource theory, what you're really coming down to is, how do you make the defining decisions around um, where the organization is going to make its investments and where it's going to place its bets? And
Okay.
typically in an organization today, that's a board decision, but largely taken by the CEO and everybody advised by the CFO. And for me, the interesting analogy is that why is the CFO such a powerful position? And it's probably uniquely powerful in the UK versus any other. I mean,
Mm,
CFOs are a powerful function, but it's unique because it's a statutory board position in the
that's right.
UK, whereas it's not really a statutory board position in America or in Europe. It's an advisory position there. But and when you look at, well, the power of the CFO is because they are the people who provide the numbers. And actually, for me, numbers are only just a subset of data. So if your chief data officer is actually increasingly providing the data for the CFO for their numbers, but also providing more predictive models, they should at least have a seat at the table with alongside the CFO in advising the CEO and the board around what resource decisions we should make, where we should place our bets. And that's basically, in a nutshell, gets you to hopefully where you get to sustainable advantage when the CDO and data is as important as finance in helping you to really determine um, where the organization should place its bets and giving you more confidence in terms of the longer term vision, hence sustained and sustainable
So
competitive
with,
performance.
with your research, I do see that there is a potential change in the board advisory roles as well. So predominantly, definitely, maybe in UK and to maybe in different countries as well. So the combination and the statutory number of people being involved in the board advisors, that might make a shift as well. So that's definitely one thing that I can see. And do you think this could be applied to any industry, any sectors, or are you thinking about applying to a specific sector?
Well, I think it can apply in any sector. I mean, interesting enough, as I said, not everything's new because I originally came up with some of these concepts 20 years ago.
Mhm.
And at the time, I wanted to call this thing intelligent business because it was actually for me, we were doing in the data world, we were doing business intelligence, reporting and business intelligence. And I said to my boss, the CEO of Capgemini UK, I want to create this new proposition called intelligent business. Go from BI to IB.
Yeah,
And he said, you can't call it intelligent business because half of our clients are public sector, and that would alienate them.
true.
So we ended up with intelligent enterprise 20 years ago. But the reality is that some of the technologies moved on and capabilities have moved on, but it's the same framework, just reborn, shall we say? So I think it is incredibly useful in the public sector
Yeah,
because I think those organisations. I mean, there's some great people trying to do great things in the NHS, but poor data is a big problem in the public sector and poor use of data. But the great thing about working for a private equity business, as I am now, like Mid Europa, is we have three main portfolios that we're investing in: healthcare, consumer, and e-commerce tech. So three quite different areas. And actually, even in healthcare, we're invested in hospitals in Romania. We're
yeah,
investing in uh, medical um, medical services in Poland, actually eye care services, which are actually quite discrete capabilities. And um, having now working with 10 CEOs, but six probably at any one time in three of those industries, same sort of issues are coming around, which are basically know our customers better, basically personalize the offer,
yeah.
drive more, you'd say, loyalty, and obviously in a commercial sense, cross sell and upsell, but um, um, and effectively simplify things by becoming a more data driven organization. So partly you could say that's a self-fulfilling prophecy because I believe in it, but actually the reality is I've got CEOs in six different businesses who
Sure.
basically have got very similar problems, and actually in addition to that, they all want to have some kind of chatbot service which is going to help improve customer service, engage things, and actually support their people more effectively as well as support their customers more effectively. So very common theme. So as I said, I think it can apply in pretty much any
Any
industry.
industry, any sectors, yeah. And pretty much you're seeing that kind of emerging anyway. So straight away they might be the consumers. So in terms of doing your research, how you're gathering the data, are you taking an approach in terms of working through any particular organization, or you're doing appealing to people to do collect the data through survey? What particular mode of operation are you taking? Which approach are you taking for your data
So
collection?
it's funny. It's you kind of I looked at how people have done research in this space, and some people have tapped into forums on LinkedIn. Other people have gone to industry bodies,
Yeah.
and I've got several thousand connections and followers on LinkedIn, and you know who your friends are when you try to actually work out who's gonna participate in this survey. And what I found is people who are full-time researchers. I think they've got the time to basically approach lots of organizations and I've ended up doing what is known as mixed methods. I think in terms of my approach, so it's a combination of research, survey to collect data, but also want to do some interviews and case studies. Now, the last thing, the case studies should be fairly straightforward because I've got five or six hopefully ready-made ones in what I'm
Mhm.
doing with Mid Europa. On the front end, I've approached several different organizations, but I've ended up hopefully I'm waiting for final approval from the ethics committee at Aston, but and my supervisor is happy that we're going to work with an organization called Data Leaders, which are dataleaders.net on the internet.
Okay.
And they are a forum of uh, chief data and chief data analytics officers, predominantly in Europe, some in America.
Yeah.
And importantly for me, they're not connected to any, they are a membership body, but they're not
Right.
connected to any technology company. Given my
That's
research,
right.
it's kind of
Yeah, it should be independent of the technology companies then. Yeah.
absolutely. And a lot of things are they're not they would say they're quasi-independent, but when you look at a lot of their events and other things, they're funded by tech companies, which for me is I can see why they have to do that because they want to keep the membership fees down, but then it's kind of it's politely defeats the object from my perspective. So
True.
hopefully with data leaders, and what I'm doing with those guys is I publish regularly a blog on LinkedIn and a newsletter, but I'm now publishing it a week early with data leaders, getting feedback, and then publish the output on LinkedIn. And then we're aiming to reach to about 100 data leaders starting pretty much in May, so May, June as a survey. And then we'll publish, I would call it I will take away that from an academic purpose, but we'll co-publish and co-author some you'd say the business version of reports, and then probably do a couple of events on the back of that to kind of publicize the
Okay.
results. So hopefully it's going to be a win for them and a win
Pretty
for me.
busy, huh? So
Yeah, but
you are anyway very busy, so it will be very
and
busy
I
days.
think if you're in doing a DBA,
Yeah.
as we are, it's kind of like the idea is it's a professional doctorate, and if you can connect it to what your day job is, then actually and it works. It doesn't always work, and it doesn't always fit right, but when it all works, actually it becomes synergistic. Um,
Absolutely. And it's very
and
interesting when you can connect to your own work, and then you can see the outcome and as well as a change wherever you need to change and use those kind of service, collect the data from the organization that you're currently working with. So yeah, brilliant. Best wishes for completing your research. When can we see the outcome?
well, yeah, I think so. You'd say the full doctorate probably takes me till 24, 25, I think, before I will have finished it. I think, as I said, I'm hoping to start publish papers from
Yeah.
the second half of this year based on the first surveys with data leaders, and then probably I'll get into the interview stage in the first half of next year, and then the case studies hopefully fall out of what I'm doing, and I end up in write-up mode basically in the second half of 24, and hopefully get it signed off by this time, maybe 2025. So
Yeah.
you said is that 2 years or so? Maybe if that would be everything goes well. Um, but in theory, it could go till 2027. But I don't think I might lose the will to live to this. I mean, I think the good thing about it is I'm trying to make it synergistic. I think the challenge that you've got doing something like this is it can be quite lonely. I think that's the. I
True.
mean, when you get the output and you start sharing it with everybody, I think that becomes a more engaging process. But as somebody in my career, I've run teams of hundreds, if not actually thousands of people, and
Yeah.
then really, as an advisor in private equity, you're kind of really an individual contributor. You're building and doing research. You're largely an individual contributor. So
That's
it's kind
right.
of
I was going to come to
that's
that
the
point
it's
about, there is a lot of data technology, but there is also a personal management of time, personal administration, and personal motivation. So, what kind of things keeps you motivated currently? Because there are a lot of work to be done. There are a lot of work you are busy in day job, busy working with as a board advisor, so it's quite busy anyway. So what helps, since it's quite lonely at the top anyway, so what helps you to keep going with your research as well as the personal motivation factor?
I think I've always been. I remember seeing the first time I went to a thing called Comdex, which was a big computer exhibition in the 1990s. Saw a presentation from the CEO of Motorola, and it was called Counterintuitive Thinking. Actually, in the same conference, there was a presentation from Bill Gates, and there was actually the launch of Masayoshi Son, who basically, very famous now investor, invested in places like Alibaba and whatever. But so
Right.
fascinating. But the CEO of Motorola is counterintuitive thinking. That's always been my kind of thing, is to really try to do things that are just against what everybody else is doing, as much to spark debate.
Okay.
And so that's what I get a buzz out of, just trying to spark some debate. If you just get the echo chamber of everybody goes, yes, that sounds really great, Eddie. Wow, fantastic. Um, that for me is kind of that's nice for your ego, but actually I get a buzz out of just saying, well, actually somebody comes back to me and says, I don't agree with you about this. I think it's this, and actually that can be a much more iterative, rewarding conversation. So I think, and then you say there is a bit about practicing what you preach, and the fact that I can bring to my work, not just my 30 years of experience, but actually some of the leading academic theory is great. And hopefully back to the academic world, because when I've looked at some of the research that people I'm building on have done, it's kind of clear that politely they never actually had to do that as a job. So some of the things that they ask and some of the things they look at are really insightful, and some of them going, I wouldn't have, as a practitioner, I've never asked that question because it's stupid.
Absolutely. Sometimes as a practitioner, you know the devil, right? Say sometimes when you're doing the research, you're completely looking from a different point of view, and also backed by the theories. And I think that's really a good combination and good mix when you're doing the research, even being a practitioner, but now looking at the research and the theories, and you can identify what are the gaps and where can you start, what can you contribute, and how can you make it a competitive advantage for the business, because it's not like the PhD research is like a doctorate in business administration, which is slightly more at being a practitioner. You have been through that challenge and journeys, and now creating something solution that will be appealing for the business.
Absolutely. So I think that's what gets me out of bed every day and kind of gets me excited. So yeah, I'm kind of enjoying the whole experience. Yeah, it can be challenging, it can be quite tough, but it's good to be doing something which I think is giving back. And I'm hoping the end result for me is kind of like, as I'm approaching kind of like the latter part of my career. I mean, I have no plans to retire, but I've described it as doing the doctorate is as much about my setting myself up for my third age career, which I expect to hopefully be a combination of strategic advisory, non-executive director, and actually some
Yeah.
training and education. Because I think when I look at it now, I was looking at Aston, but also other universities, a lot of people are doing MScs in data and analytics. But the reality is, with a lot of the developments in AI and there's larger, that won't be a big thing. But being more of a data-driven business, the data-driven MBA, I think that's probably. So I'd like to be maybe in 2 or 3 years' time, basically being the adjunct professor, doing that as part of my career and just giving
Yeah.
something back. So hopefully, end up with a win-win out of all of this.
Good. Thank you so much, Eddie, for coming to my show and talking about your research, your personal motivation factor, and also talking about the data, digital, and technology. So thank you so much. Wish you all the best for completing your research, and hope to see your research paper soon or read your publishing papers. So I'll share the links if you're happy to, so that you can reach out to more people. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Lippy. Much appreciated. Yeah, look forward to it. So, pleasure.
Thank you. Bye now.